Today we're in Ruth chapter 2 and chapter 4, starting with verse 6. Then Naomi arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return, each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. She said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. From chapter 4. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Our passage this morning picks up the story of Ruth with a conversation between Naomi and her daughters-in-law, and it takes place on the side of the road halfway between Moab and Bethlehem. It was a moment of decision. But before we consider Ruth's story, I want us to begin like we did last week by starting with another story. I want to start with another story that also took place on the side of the road. There was a man that came up to the good teacher when he was passing through. The Bible tells us his full name, first, middle, and last. It was Rich Young Ruler. And he came up to the rabbi and he asked, "Good rabbi, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And the rabbi said, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God. But if you desire eternal life, then keep the commandments. Don't murder, don't steal, don't bear false witness. Love your neighbor as yourself." The rich young ruler says, "That's fantastic. That's great, because I've done all of that since my youth. Is there anything else?" And the rabbi said, "Yes, one more thing. Sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and come, follow me." It was a moment of decision on the side of the road. Perhaps you know the story. The rich young ruler couldn't do it. He couldn't do what this rabbi asked of him. And he walked away from the opportunity of a lifetime, sorrowful and grieved, because great were his possessions. Life was, in fact, offered to him. But for him, it came at too great a cost. And so it's in this moment of decision that the rich young ruler encounters a very old question. Is it really worth it to follow Jesus? Is it really worth it to follow him when sometimes it feels like he asks too much of us? And that's certainly not a new question. We see that same question throughout the Bible, where so many others had to wrestle with the cost of being faithful to this God. Elijah wrestling on the mountaintop when he felt completely alone and abandoned. Or Jeremiah being faithful as he watched the kingdom crumble around him. Or think of John the Baptist, who, while he was in prison, was wondering if Jesus was really who he said he was. It seems that doubt and despair are woven into the fabric of our faith, which means that if they had to wrestle, then it's probably safe to assume that you will too. And so, is it really worth it to follow this Jesus, and not just when it's easy, but when it's hard? When he takes what you don't really want to give, when he withholds the very thing that you want to have. Jesus may not ask you to sell everything and follow him. He'll ask you in other ways. He'll ask you to come and follow him when he takes your health, when he asks for your job, when he asks for your career, when he asks for your business, when he asks for your loved ones by either death or betrayal. Will you follow him in depression and despair? Will you follow him in cynicism? Or when the waters of marriage and parenting get choppy and rough? Is it really worth it to follow this Jesus? The question comes to us all. And in this story, the rich young ruler, you receive the invitation to life. But you can see it, he can only hear it as loss. And he walks away sad and grieved. Perhaps he needed the story of Ruth. Because when she was on the side of the road, when she had absolutely nothing to her name, the very situation that the rich young ruler feared, when Ruth was in that situation, well, for her, that's when her faith began. That's when a new story began to be told in her life. And so what could this rich young ruler have learned from her story? What might have made him go gather up his possessions and sell them and actually follow this Jesus? So what could he have learned from her story? Well, in our passage, we started with 3 women on the side of the road, 3 weeping widows: Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. So let me catch you up on their tragedy real fast. Naomi and her husband Elimelech took their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they moved to the foreign nation of Moab whenever there was a long famine that had fallen in Bethlehem. And it was there that their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, married 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. One big happy family. But then life changed. Life came at them fast. Because Naomi loses her husband, Elimelech. Then Ruth loses her husband, Mahlon. And then Orpah loses her husband, Kilian. And life fell apart. What did they have? They had nothing but hunger and heartache. And they hear that after 10 years, the famine in Bethlehem has finally ended. And so with nothing but each other, they begin this journey to Bethlehem. For Naomi, it was coming home. And for Ruth and Orpah, the first time. But halfway there, Naomi stops. She pulls over on the side of the road. She stops the car. She says, look, I can't do this. Ruth, Orpah, go home to your mothers. Go home while you're still young. Go and be married. I release you. I pray that God provides for you. He gives you a husband and a family because I have nothing. I have nothing to offer you. I have no husband to care for you. I have no sons to give you. Leave me while you still have a chance to make a life for yourself. Can you imagine what it was like to hear those words? Such heartbreaking words. But they're words that became a reality because Orpah got up, and in her tears she kissed Naomi and she said goodbye. And she went back the way that they came. And then Naomi turns to Ruth in her tears and she says, you too, go back. Go. But listen to what Ruth says. She says, no, I will not leave you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. And may the Lord kill me if anything but death parts me from you. Can you imagine what it was like to hear those words? What's Ruth saying when she says this? Yeah, on the surface, it appears as though she's simply committing her life to Naomi's good. But in reality, the deeper reality, the more important reality, she's converting. This is the language of conversion. She's using the covenant language of Yahweh who says, you will be my people, and I will be your God. Ruth is using those same covenantal words when she says, your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God, and she swears by his name. Now, by virtue of her marriage, she would have converted in practice, but it was here in this moment, on the side of the road, when she had nothing, well, that's when she converted in her heart. She says, your God is my God. I entrust my story, our story, to him. And what did that mean for her? What did this decision mean in the here and now? It meant destitution. Because let me define poverty for you in the ancient world. It's two widowed women with no sons. Ruth's faith began when she had nothing. Despite the poverty, the struggle that lie ahead, and despite the sorrow and the grief that she felt already and that she would feel in the future, she didn't turn back. She trusted. She came and she followed this God. Now, the story could just end right there. And it would be beautiful in its own right. It'd be an incredible story. It's already so compelling and so moving. You'd be hard-pressed to find any more beautiful words, a better speech than what Ruth says. But the story doesn't end here in chapter 1. It's just the beginning of what God is doing, because Ruth's story is not a story about what she gives. Ruth's story is a story about what she receives. And that story is just beginning. And the first thing we see that she receives in her new life is grain. When Ruth and Naomi return to Bethlehem, they've got nothing but lint in their pockets and sunshine on their backs. They have to provide for themselves. They have nothing, no resources, so they have to get to work. So Ruth, being the younger and the stronger, asked Naomi if she could go out into the fields and glean. She asked to go out into the fields to glean for grain. And during the harvest, you'd see gleaners all over the place if you looked out into the fields. You'd see gleaners following behind the harvesters. The gleaners were the poor, the destitute, the sojourner, and they were allowed to follow behind the harvesters to pick up any of the leftover grain that fell on the ground, or they could harvest a certain part of the field that was left just for them so that they could have food. Why? Because God commanded it. One of his laws in the Torah was that the wealthy landowners had to leave a portion of their fields for the poor and the needy among them. He commanded them to give up some profit to provide for the less fortunate, for he is a generous God. So here's Ruth beginning her new life as a gleaner. So she goes out into the fields to glean. Now, if I pause right there for a second, and maybe try and get us to connect with this situation and see it with spiritual eyes, let me ask you this. Do you feel like Ruth? Do you feel as though you live like a gleaner? What I mean by that is that you feel like you live off the leftovers of another's blessing. So yeah, you profess faith. Yeah, you believe. But you feel like you live on the margins of the people of God. You live off scraps. And you want so much more. So you hear others talking about their blessings or their relationship with God. And for a moment, it's encouraging to your faith, but then you sigh. Because that's not your story. Or maybe you listen to others who seem so blessed with insight. They seem so well fed in their faith, such a vibrant relationship with the Lord, and you're encouraged for a moment by what they were given, and yet you still feel so hungry. You hunger for more. You hunger for your own story, your own blessing, your own testimony of God's goodness and favor towards you. Now, the rich young ruler didn't know it, but that's exactly what he was looking for. He did what God commanded him, yes, but he still felt a hunger within him. It's why he came to Jesus in the first place, to ask him for more. What else must I do to inherit eternal life, real life? Something's missing. But in the end, maybe you feel like he did. When that answer comes to you, you feel like you're asked to give more than you'll ever be given. So yeah, at times it feels like following Jesus is worth it. Isn't it worth it when you already feel like you get so little in return? And if that's you, let me just say this to you. That hunger is the best part of you. That hunger is the best part of you. Because that's the hunger that wants something that this world can't give. That hunger is the Lord Jesus drawing you to himself. It's actually through hunger that he drew Ruth to himself. See her and her story in this moment. Because her journey with this new life began with a hunger as well. It was a literal hunger that drove her out into the fields. But in reality, that hunger was bringing her into her story of redemption. And so, my friend, where might your hunger take you? Well, where did it take Ruth? Well, at the end of the first day of gleaning, she came home with grain, a mother load of grain. She brought home an ephah, which was about 30 pounds. So Naomi was like, where did you get that? Like, gleaning is not just going and taking a bag of grain that you see. You can't steal. So where did you get that? It's a lot of grain to bring home after one day of work. But Ruth tells her that it was from the fields of a man named Boaz. And Boaz was very kind to her, and it was a gift from him. Because as Ruth was working in the fields, Boaz was the landowner, and so he came to check on his field. And as he did, he noticed Ruth. He noticed the new girl in town. And he asked his foreman who she was, and his foreman said, well, that's Ruth. She's a Moabite. She asked to glean, and she's worked hard all day. So Boaz goes to Ruth. And did you see how extraordinarily kind to her he was? He tells her not to glean in any other field, only his, and to stay close with the women of his family. He tells his men not to touch her. He tells his men to leave her alone. And then he tells her to get water from his own vessels, a foreign woman. In short, he shows an extraordinary kindness to Ruth, so much so that Ruth just says, "Why are you being so kind to me, a foreign woman?" Hear what Boaz says. He says, "Because I've heard of you. I've heard of who you are. I've heard of what you did for your mother-in-law and all that you gave up in leaving your family, leaving your land, and leaving your people to be a part of our people." He says, "So Ruth, may the Lord repay you for what you've done. May he shelter you in his wings." And he moves towards Ruth with compassion. Because to top all that off, he invited her to come and sit at his table with his family, to eat his food, and then he sends her home with 30 pounds of grain. He sends her home with grain from his own stock. Here's a man that goes above and beyond the requirements of the law to love his neighbor. And not just to love his neighbor, but to love his neighbor as himself. And not just any neighbor, but a Moabite. And not just any Moabite, but a Moabite woman, a foreign woman. And he shows to Ruth what the Bible calls hesed love, a covenantal, committed kind of love, the type of love that God shows and displays to his people. And why would he do that? Well, perhaps in part because Boaz knows that he exists. He's alive because of the very kind of covenantal love and compassion that he is displaying towards Ruth. Boaz is like his daddy, Salmon, who loved his mother, a foreign woman named Rahab. And there's a room, and he knows that there is room in this kingdom for a foreign woman. And he moves towards her with compassion. So when Naomi hears about Boaz, the wheels start turning. Because she learns that Ruth came into his field, and she realizes that Boaz is a relative. And he could actually be what was called a Kinsmen Redeemer. And a Kinsmen Redeemer comes from Leviticus 25. It's one of those laws that's there to protect the welfare and the good of a family. So just like we saw with Judah and Tamar and the Levirate law, we also have the Kinsmen Redeemer laws that protected the family. Because what were the two most important possessions in ancient Israel? It was family and land. And the Levirate law protected and maintained the family line in the event of death. And it's the Kinsmen Redeemer laws that maintain the family land in the event that it's lost. And so that meant that a wealthy relative could be a Kinsman Redeemer. They could purchase the land back, the land of their relatives, to keep it in the family. They could buy it back, and they could redeem it for them. And so Naomi hears the name Boaz. The wheels start turning, and she devises a plan to hit two birds with one stone. One, to marry off Ruth and provide her with an heir to continue the family name. But also to regain the land that was lost when they left from Moab 10 years before. And this plan is quite interesting. I'm so glad that the story does not end in chapter 1. Here's the plan. Naomi tells Ruth to wash and anoint herself, and to put on her cloak, to wait until late in the night, after Boaz has finished eating and drinking, and then when he goes to bed, and he's on the threshing floor where they stored the grain. That's where Ruth's supposed to go late at night, because she knew that he'd be sleeping there during the harvest to protect it from robbers, and he'd be all alone. And then once he's asleep, Ruth is to sneak in, uncover his feet, lay down next to him, and then when he wakes up, to do whatever he says. That's the plan. I've got your attention now. Just let me paraphrase. Ruth, I want you to put on your going out clothes. And I want you to wait till it's dark. And I want you to sneak into his room. I want you to pull back the covers, take this mixtape, hit play. Roxanne will start gently playing in the background, and then lay down, and when he wakes up, Do whatever he tells you. Now, this is exactly what it looks like. You can't escape it. You can't escape the reality of this scene. It's highly suggestive, highly euphemistic. It's loaded language with all sorts of innuendo and erotic overtones, and the text is begging you to see it that way. You can't avoid it. She is not sending Ruth to a prayer and praise night. In effect, she's telling Ruth to put her best foot forward, to use what she has and to make herself available. In fact, it's really the only way that we can see the real beauty of this story is to recognize this scene for what it is. So what does Ruth do? When she gets ready, she sneaks across town in the middle of the night. She walks in, she pulls back the covers, she makes herself available. But it's not in the way that Naomi implied. What does she do? Boaz wakes up and he asks, "Who are you?" And she says, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant and be my redeemer." Now, any ancient Israelite would know exactly what Ruth just said. Let me put it in our language. Boaz, will you marry me? Boaz, will you allow me to be your wife and redeem my family? Now, Boaz knows exactly what's happening. And he's aware that Naomi sent Ruth. He knows what's being asked of him. He knows what's being offered to him. But it's Ruth's request that moves him so deeply. What's he say? He says, "This kindness that you are showing me is even more extraordinary than the first." And what he means by that is that what she's doing in this moment is even better than when she committed herself to Naomi and to God at the beginning of the story. Because Ruth, at her own expense, is seeking to provide for her family. But Boaz is moved because of how she's going about seeking that provision. And he says something so touching. He says, "You could have gone after any of the young men, and they would have had you, and they would have provided for you. You could have been a part of a new family. You could have gone after all of those younger men." What's he doing? He's expressing his humility. He's a man that doesn't think very highly of himself. He's not a young man anymore. He's a little grayer. He's a little older. He's a little less desirable. And he's saying there are so many other better options that you could have had, but you chose the least of these. And she didn't try to start a new life with a new family. He notices that she tries to honor and redeem the family she had, and she seeks security and shelter through what? Through the Kinsmen Redeemer laws, through the very avenue that God provided. He's moved because not only is she seeking shelter for her family at her own expense, but he's moved by her faith that she would ultimately move to seek shelter under the wings of the Lord her God. So what does Boaz do? Well, it's here that we see his integrity. He comforts her. He tells her not to be afraid. Why? She's probably scared to death. She has no idea what he would do. And he comforts her. And then he tells her, "Yes, I will be your redeemer." But there's another relative that has first rights before him. And he says, "Be that as it may." He tells her that he will take care of her. He will seek her redemption. And then he does three things. He protects her. And he allows her to stay with him so that she's safe at night to protect her reputation, her safety, and her dignity. And then he provides for her and Naomi. That morning, he sends her home with grain, more grain as a token of his commitment and his devotion to seek their good. And lastly, he makes a promise that as the Lord lives, he will seek her redemption. He will be her redeemer one way or another. He just asks that Ruth trusts him. So the next day, Boaz makes good on his promise. He goes to the city gate where this business has to take place. And when the man that Boaz was waiting for walks by, he calls out to him and he asks him to come and sit down. And it's funny because the text doesn't actually give us this man's name. It actually refers to him, the translation is so-and-so. Boaz calls him so-and-so. The Bible doesn't give us his name because it just wants us to look at him for a second. It doesn't want us to remember him. But you could consider him to be like a rich young ruler, because he too was invited to follow the commands of the Lord. And Boaz tells him of the opportunity, his right to buy the land back for Naomi and redeem it for her. And there's a lot of complexity to this situation, but essentially it looks like this. This man had the opportunity to buy the land, and it would have increased his estate. It would have increased his financial portfolio, because Naomi had no sons. And that meant that this man didn't have to worry about handing that land over in the future. It was his. And so according to the law, it's his if he wants it, with all of its profit. Sure, he could take care of Naomi and provide for her, and he could think of all of that profit that he would make in addition. He could develop the land, use it as an investment, and make more money. He's an opportunistic man. He's a businessman. He knows a great deal when he sees it, so he says, of course, where do I sign? But then Boaz gives him the opportunity of a lifetime. And it's an opportunity not just to follow a law, but to go above and beyond, to display hesed, covenantal love, that he was not required to do in order to buy this land. But Boaz puts him to a question. And he says, okay, but there's one more thing if you want this land. You can also marry Ruth, her daughter-in-law, as well. And you can redeem this family to the fullest possible extent. And he does this in front of all the crowds, all the witnesses, and all the elders. But for this man, it changed the game. Because now, for this rich young ruler, he sees things differently. Now he sees the sacrifice and the commitment and the responsibility of what he's being asked to do. He's seeing how much it would change his life, how much he'd have to give up. He'd have to marry Ruth. And if he provided her with a son, then that meant that all of the land and all of its profit would revert to that son. So he does the math. And the math doesn't add up. All he can hear in this opportunity is loss. And he was willing to follow the law when he got something out of it. But he walked away when it cost him something. And so Boaz says, I will redeem her. Because this man walks away. And he says, it's yours. And Boaz says, I will be her redeemer. And all of the elders and all of the witnesses who are watching this play out, what do they say? They say that we are witnesses. And may this Moabite woman build up the house of Israel. And may your son, may your house be like Perez, who was born to Tamar and Judah. There's no doubt they saw the beauty of what just unfolded before them. They saw the beauty of Hesed love. They saw the real love behind the law. And then Boaz goes to find his bride. And then it's baby time. She conceives. The Lord gave her conception. She bore a son. It was a hunky little bubba named Obed. And Obed would grow old, and he'd watch his grandson become a mighty king. A king that would build up the house of Israel. A king named David. But let's not forget about our friend, the rich young ruler that walked away from Jesus. The man who walked away from the opportunity of a lifetime, sad and sorrowful, wrestling with that great question, is it really worth it to follow this Jesus when it feels as though sometimes he commands too much? Well, what would Ruth say? What would Ruth say to this man? To what does her story testify? She could say, apart from God's law, I would have no good. It was through his commands that he provided for me. It was through his laws that he showed me his goodness. And you might think, how so? Well, think about her story. It's one where the law of God, his very commands, continued to provide for her over and over and over again. It was through his commands that began to rebuild a new life for her, a life she never thought that she was going to live. She was a part of a story that she never thought she would be a part of that story, through these very commands that rebuilt a new life for her, because it was through God's provision and the gleaning laws that he provided her food. It was through the Kinsmen Redeemer laws that God restored her family inheritance. And it was through the command to love your neighbor as yourself that God ultimately gave her a husband and a child. And so to this rich young ruler, her story says, do not turn back. Don't walk away. When I had nothing, I found everything. What you're afraid that he's asking you, you don't have to be afraid of. Come and follow this one. You can follow his commands. You can do what he asks, even when it's hard, because it's through his commands that I came to know his covenantal, hesed love for me. You can follow this one. And for the skeptic in the room, you may think to yourself, well, that's easy for Ruth to say. She ended up with a husband, and God gave her a baby. And you're right, he did. But he gave you a better one. He gave you a baby that would become this teacher, this rabbi, this king, the same one that asked so much of this rich young ruler. But before he ever asked this rich young ruler to give up his possessions, what does the Bible say? It says that Jesus looked at him and he loved him. He loved him. He looked at him and loving him. And it was then that he said, sell everything you have and follow me. The opportunity of a lifetime. He had the opportunity to empty his hands and know that hesed kind of love. And Ruth's story testifies that that love came to him, but it does not come empty-handed. Come and follow him. And it's in this Advent season that you're given the same invitation that we see with Naomi. We find her at the very end of the book, holding her little Obed on her lap, taking him in. The same woman who before said, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, call me bitter, because the Lord has dealt so harshly with me. He's asked so much of me. But that little Bubba that she's holding told her a different story. That her God does not call her bitter. He calls her beloved. And that's the Advent invitation before you, to start at square one. To come and behold another baby, the one given to you. And realize that it's there that you find that hesed, covenantal love of God for you, and it's there that you will understand why you have that hunger within you. And it's there that you'll find everything when you have nothing. Because Ruth's story is one where God displayed his hesed love by giving her a baby. But your story is one where God gives you the baby that is hesed love. And that baby comes to you and it communicates something in flesh and blood. I am the God that gives you myself. Now will you give yourself to me? Will you come to me and follow? Will you listen to my words? Will you let me lead you and guide you? Will you follow my commands so that I can write your story? And will you come to know that my love does not come to you empty-handed, even when I ask you to empty your hands? Will you come and follow me? And will you come to know he who is unending, eternal, immeasurable, hesed love? My friends, he does not call you bitter. He calls you beloved. Let's pray.